Hello, my name is Dr. Matthew Timon. I'm coming to you from my studio here in Tucson, Arizona. I am the principal percussionist of the North State Symphony, but you might be wondering why I'm coming to you from Tucson, and that's because that's where I live. Aside from being the principal percussionist of North State Symphony, I'm also a section percussionist with the Rogue Valley Symphony in Southern Oregon. I'm a section percussionist with the Flagstaff Symphony in Flagstaff, Arizona. I'm a section percussionist with the Sierra Vista Symphony in far southern Arizona. And I'm also substitute and extra player with the Tucson Symphony as well as the Arizona Opera Orchestra in Phoenix. Today I thought I'd take some time to talk about a subject which is really important in percussion, which is the idea of sound selection. Because of so many instruments of the percussion family being a fixed pitch, when we approach sound in the percussion section, we're not so much thinking about some of the general issues that other instruments are thinking about, such as intonation, because our intonation is fixed. My xylophone is always going to play the same pitch no matter how I play it. However, I can adjust the sound by using a different mallet, using a different touch on the bar, playing in a different part of the bar, and those are all sound considerations that we have to take into account when we're preparing to play a piece of music. Also, when we're talking about sound selection, it can go beyond the implement that we're using. It can also be specific instrument selection. If you look behind me at the snare drums we have here, there are many various sizes of snare drum, from large drums, which would be field drums, to more normal sized concert snare drums, to very small snare drums, which would be piccolo snare drums. All of them have very different timbral qualities and can be used for very specific things. Having all of these instruments allows us to have a color palette to choose from in order to find the right sound for what we're trying to do. Aside from just the size, the material of the shell, the head that it has on it, the thickness of the head, the material of the head. Some of these have plastic heads, some of these have heads which are made of calfskin. Besides all of those, we also have different snare configurations. So the wires are made out of different materials, they're wrapped in different things, there's different combinations of snares. So those are all different sound choices that we can make to try to fulfill our idealized sound for whatever we're trying to perform. I thought today we could talk about sound selection for a specific piece, and that piece would be Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. Having a wide variety of instruments not only adds to our color palette and allows us to try to realize the sound that's in our mind, it also allows us to try to replicate certain sonic ideas. So with Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, we think a lot about period instruments, or trying to replicate the sound as it would have been heard in Beethoven's time. At the time of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, percussion instruments were fairly new to the orchestra. Percussion instruments really have only been in the orchestra for maybe about 150 years. And all of the roots of the main instruments which are being included come from a musical tradition called Janissary music. So Janissary music was the musicians of the Sultan's Imperial Guard of Turkey. The Janissary musicians would play instruments that have modern equivalents in the orchestra, such as timpani is similar to the kettle drums they used. They had triangles, cymbals, bass drums. They had instruments that we don't see as often also, like the Turkish crescent, though you see it every once in a while. Early use of percussion instruments in the orchestra often were used to evoke this Janissary music. It was trying to represent these Turkish musicians on the orchestra stage. It also was used to kind of represent this musical other, which at the time was kind of misunderstood or thought of as, kind of fearful noise a little bit. Let's talk about specific instruments and what we would use in the modern orchestra to try to evoke the same sounds as the Janissary musicians. Triangle has obviously modern equivalents. There are also period triangles which you can purchase, which are more like what the Janissary musicians actually used. Bass drum we can just use a bass drum. However, preferably we use a smaller bass drum, and we also want to try to use a bass drum that has calf heads, which is more indicative of the sound at the time. Let's talk about my favorite instrument though. Let's talk about cymbals. So the Janissary musician cymbals were a lot smaller cymbals, they were a lot thicker cymbals. They're not really the sound that we might associate right away with modern crash cymbals. This is a pair of modern crash cymbals. These are 20-inch cymbals. The cymbals at the time of the Janissary musicians were much, much smaller, and they were much thicker. So we can use an analog by using cymbals that were closer to the beginning of the 20th century. This pair of cymbals is a pair of K Constantinople cymbals that were made in Constantinople at the beginning of the 20th century, probably around 1912 or 1913. These are 12-inch cymbals. They're much, much thicker, much, much smaller than the modern cymbals, which I showed previously. These are one sound option we could use. This is another option. These are a little bit bigger. These are also K Constantinople cymbals. These are 15-inch cymbals. Thankfully, because these instruments are available and they've been preserved over the years, we're able to use them in order to have the most accurate performance possible. Thanks for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this, maybe learned a little bit of something. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay inside, take care of yourself, and I look forward to seeing you in the fall. If you have questions about percussion or you have comments, feel free to reach out to me, reach out to the symphony, comment on this video. I spend a lot of time on social media these days, so I'll probably see it. So if you have a question, I'll probably respond to it. Alright, take care.